Okay, keep in mind that what you're seeing right here is a picture with some circles. We'll come to those in a minute. But you can see here the pink is the intersection point in southern Illinois. Here's the state of Illinois coming down, and the point is right there. Okay, and remember 7. 7 is a very, very sacred number. So when you see the number 7, it's a kind of a good sign that Heavenly Father is asking us to pay attention. So here you see the intersection of the two eclipses. Okay. Now, I have been fascinated with the year 2020 for some time. I feel honestly, it is the prophet Russell M. Nelson calls it a hinge point in the church, but I think we're going to talk about that. 2020 is a very important year. It's actually the midpoint between the two eclipses, as we'll see here in just a minute. We're going to study some more about the anatomy of an eclipse. There's 2 charts. This first chart, these are from NASA, and you can see from this chart, this is a 24-year period, and during that 24-year period, there are 27 eclipses. So they happen more than once a year. But not all eclipses are created equal, as you'll see here. Some of them are what they call annular eclipses. Others are called a hybrid eclipse. You can see they're not perfect. They're not total. Total eclipses during that 24-year period, there's 13 total solar eclipses. We're going to go to the next 24-year period, and we're going to filter only the perfect or the total eclipses. And you'll see here that the total eclipses from 2001 to 2025, there's a total of 15. Now, this is the time period we're really wanting to study, because in this time period, we have those 2 intersecting eclipses right here. 2017, August 21st. 2024, April 8th. Now, as I started looking at those, I thought, is there anything that could tie these together other than 7 years? And lo and behold, there are 3 eclipses between those 2. This one really got my eye, because remember, I'm studying 2020, and 2020 is a very important year to the Lord. And I couldn't find a connection, but I listened to a podcast from somebody. I can't remember how I came to this, but suddenly I realized it's the golden midpoint of those 2 eclipses. So let's take a moment and look at that. Okay, so you can see by the arrows going that the December 14th, 2020 eclipse is exactly 1,211 days after the first one, and exactly 1,211 days before the next one. So it is the true midpoint, exactly 3.5 years between those 2. Once again, this idea of coincidences, I hope in your mind, starting to fade away. That's not a coincidence. Okay. And, 3.5 years is mentioned in the scriptures a few times. And since I believe that we are coming up on the return of our Savior in the not too distant future, I find that the Lord is giving us some points. The 42 new moons between the 2017 and the midpoint eclipse connect with the 2 prophets preaching in the streets of Jerusalem in connection with the Battle of Armageddon. They held off the advancing armies for 3.5 years. Then, after being killed, lay dead in the streets of Jerusalem for 3.5 days before ascending to heaven. Obviously, if they ascended, doesn't that mean they're being resurrected? Anyway, they do rise from the dead and ascend into heaven. So let's look at December 14th right here. You'll notice what that is. That's a new moon. A few weeks later, you see a full moon. This is important because a solar eclipse can only take place during the phase of the new moon, when the moon passes directly between the sun and the earth, and its shadows fall upon the earth's surface. By the same rule, a lunar eclipse can only take place during the full moon phase. So the question that is, we're going to watch. This is the eclipse in Argentina. Boom, there it goes. Total eclipse happening in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Okay, so here's a question. What if the solar eclipse took place at the November new moon phase instead of December? With only 41 new moons, the entire 3.5-year connection would be lost. Once again, I wouldn't even be talking about this. But it's so precise. That's the thing about eclipses. They don't allow any fudge room. They're either, it's totally precise. It's either a connection or it's not. Okay. So we see that the moon rose here in Utah at 9:16 a.m. No one saw it because it's a new moon. It's in daytime. 2 hours later in Argentina, so that would be 11:13 a.m., the eclipse started in Argentina, or Chile, I should say. So I feel that there's a strong connection there. I'm not telling you what it is, but I know that it's not just a coincidence. We're going to look at another thing about this midpoint. Remember, I said the 2020 is a hinge point. So what is a hinge point? A hinge point is where something literally pivots. It's the turning point where you're going to see a significant change take place. You can also look at it as a hinge point, a door open, a method to open a door. So this could be a door opening or something like that. But a hinge point's important. There are gospel hinge points. And here's some examples. The flood, definitely a hinge point. The birth of Christ, crucifixion of Christ, the first vision, and the millennium. Those are events that open doors or change things dramatically. So could 2020 be a hinge point year? Yes, it is. We're not going to go into that. That's a whole nother presentation. But 2020, that's why this eclipse in 2020 really, when you begin to understand it, it is the key to the two other eclipses. And here's something that kind of gives you a flavor for why I think that 2020 is a hinge point year. 1820, obviously a hinge point year. It's the date of the opening of the dispensation of the fullness of times. 1620, look at these dates. They're 200 years apart, exactly, right to the day. The Pilgrims arrived in 1620. Why didn't they arrive in 1619? Why didn't they arrive in 1621? They arrived in 1620. And there is so much significance. Liberty was brought to this land. The blood of Ephraim was brought to this land, meeting the blood of Manasseh, all of those things that we're not going to have time to go into. And now you look at 2020, and President Nelson says, this is a hinge point. And you look at the events of 2020, and it was a year unlike any other year. The pandemic, the election, the whole world was affected by it. Everything, the gospel kind of slowed down. So the question is, are these 3 years hinge points in the world's history, in the churches? I think there's an abundance of evidence to prove that, yes, all 3 of them are hinge points. But that's another presentation. I just wanted to give you a teaser that the 2020 eclipse was very powerful, and it basically connected the 2 eclipses. The heart of America. Notice this slide right here. They are intersecting this America and telling everyone something special about this promised land. We took a trip back east in 2019. Here you see our truck on the shores of this little lake called Cedar Lake. We were taking a load of furniture back to Columbus, Ohio, for a son of Brett and Phoebe K. Hawks. Stan and his new wife were going to graduate school. And we said, hey, we'll be happy to take your furniture back there. But my wife and I had every desire on that trip. We were going to find the point of intersection. Nobody could tell us where the point of intersection was, except that it was on the shores of Cedar Lake. So I pulled out Google Maps, Google Earth. Here you see the Mississippi River flowing down. And this little yellow line is a line that, of course, here's Cedar Lake. There's the boat launch, the parking lot we were at. We thought we were there, or we thought we were close. But this yellow line actually will take you to the intersection. So there is the intersection, still near the shores of Cedar Lake. But look at this road right here. This is curious. The name of that road is none other than Salem Road. Now, part 1 of this presentation, we talk about the 7 cities of Salem. But the intersection at Salem Road, is that a coincidence? The distance from the boat launch up here to there is 1.5 miles. So we were close, but we were not there. Okay, so moving on, here's another view of that area. And the little town of Makanda is near the intersection, so we'll point that out. And here is Cedar Lake, and there is Salem Road, and the pink shows where we were at. We were close, but we just weren't there. Okay, the heart of America. America is an important place. This is President Nelson in a presentation he made to the new mission presidents in June of 2016. He says, the Book of Mormon reveals the inheritance of Joseph, son of Israel, was not forgotten when the land was distributed to the tribes of Israel. As promised in the Abrahamic covenant, Joseph's inheritance was to be a land choice above all others. It was choice not because of beauty or wealth or natural resources, but it was choice for 3 reasons. Choice because it was chosen to be the repository of sacred writings. And notice he doesn't say the box, but a repository. A repository is a library. The repository of sacred writings, on gold plates, from which the Book of Mormon would one day come. It was choice, the second reason, because it would eventually host the world headquarters of the restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was choice for a third reason, because it is a land of liberty for those who worship the Lord and keep his commandments. So as you study this a little more, you ask yourself the question, what land could President Nelson be referring to? What land meets all three choice requirements? Looking at it from another point, the two sons of Joseph each received their inheritance, Ephraim and the Manasseh, in one promised land. But to Joseph was given another land. Remember, he was to receive a separate inheritance. Where was his inheritance going to be? The land of Joseph, the USA. So you've got the two promised lands here, each with their own set of unique stewardships. While both lands are referenced as promised lands, each has its own stewardship. Here, President Nelson is providing us with two additional labels for one of those promised lands. What did he say? One is it's a choice land, a land choice above all others. And number two, it is the land of Joseph. Now we go into destruction. This intersection point provides a powerful connection to elements of destruction. Okay, first of all, the mother of all tornadoes. We all know that a tornado is very destructive. The mother of all tornadoes in 1925. Going back to our intersection point. On March 18th, 1925, a Category 5 hurricane struck in Missouri. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, obviously kids were in school, and I had to put together, I think, 4 maps to come up with this path. But I can tell you it's accurate. This is the ending point at 4:30 in the afternoon in Indiana. Incredible. Look at the path and how close it is to the point of intersection. Look at the balance. It literally kind of frames that intersection point, doesn't it? And look at the length of that tornado, 219 miles. Some more information. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. It shows you the path, the counties that it goes through, the 3 states that it touches, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. And up here, it shows the cities that were destroyed or partially destroyed by this devastating tornado. And here it shows that it traveled 219 miles. So reviewing those facts and what caused it to be given the title as the mother of all tornadoes. It is a Category 5, winds of 300, average speed 62, but 73 miles per hour top speeds. That's freeway speed. You're cruising down the highway at 73 miles an hour. Thousands were left homeless, much destruction, but not catastrophic destruction, because remember, this is a kind of a rural, remote area. Not a lot of cities, no cities, in fact, towns, and a lot of farmers with a lot of fields. It was one of the largest and fastest in U.S. history. But this is the thing that pushed it over the edge as the mother of all tornadoes. The longest traveled tornado in U.S. history, 219 miles. Incredible. Here's a picture of the tornado. And as we look again, just before we leave this slide, just look at that, how it frames that intersection. Now, asking that question again, is this divine design or is this a coincidence? Just a coincidence. Let's move on. Tornadoes are destructive. Where's 90% of all tornadoes in the whole world? They're right there in Tornado Alley. Where's Tornado Alley? In the heartland of America. For this little area of Tornado Alley to have the mother of all tornadoes right here. Is that a coincidence? You got to be saying, no, it's not a coincidence. So in the Book of Mormon, does it mention tornadoes? Well, no, but it mentions something that I think is a tornado. Could a whirlwind be another name for a tornado? Remember the great destruction at the time of Jesus Christ's crucifixion in America, in the Promised Land. Could this be a connection with that? Remember the people that were carried away in the whirlwind? What could be a whirlwind? It's either going to be a hurricane or a tornado. It can't be anything else. And I don't think a hurricane fits with the Heartland or with the Book of Mormon lands. So it has to be a tornado. And you'll see the evidence is mounting for it being a tornado and it being in this area.
Fine, right now we're good. We're still good. That's violent.
It's EF4. It's EF4.
Now this tornado that is being tracked, this is on YouTube. This is from YouTube, I should say. And I don't think these guys are amateurs. They don't seem to be afraid of this tornado. This, by the way, is in Kansas.
Stop the wipers.
That thing is huge. It's huge.
Oh my goodness.
It's huge.
Look at this thing.
It's huge. It's huge.
Okay. So we've covered the mother of all tornadoes. Now, guess what? There's another element of destruction. This one is the mother of all earthquakes. Crazy. So as we travel from the intersection point, 73 miles to the south, we arrive at a little town on the Mississippi River at this giant S-curve called New Madrid. And as you're driving down the highway near New Madrid, you'll see an old road sign saying, "The New Madrid earthquake, the greatest earthquake recorded in North America, centered in this area from December 16th to February 7th, 1812. 1,874 earthquakes occurred in this area." So let's look at that a little more.
One of America's worst earthquakes occurred 200 years ago in the heart of the country.
The mother of all earthquakes in the United States was in 1811 and 1812 in an obscure place in southern Missouri, where Missouri, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Illinois all meet, called New Madrid.
December 1811. The weather was warmer than usual in New Madrid, Missouri.
There were about 500 or 600 people living in New Madrid. It was a thriving river city. It was located on the largest S-curve in that section of the river.
A little after 2 in the morning on December 16th, the earth sort of came unglued with the first of the earthquakes.
There was a great roar that's compared in the accounts to thunder or heavy artillery, and the ground started shaking, and people were thrown from their beds, furniture was overturned, and in the middle of the night in 1811, you would have no idea what this was.
Intense seismic waves radiated in all directions for hundreds of miles.
The thing about New Madrid is that it's in the middle of a vast alluvial plain, and the seismic shocks from it spread unrestricted across certainly eastern America. They rang church bells in Boston, they were felt in New York City, they knocked a church steeple down in Charleston, South Carolina, they were felt in the deep south of America.
Okay. So the little town of New Madrid lies right on the Mississippi. The people built a platform so that you could look out over the Mississippi. So let's go ahead and take a drone view. And I want you to really pay close attention to the huge volume of water that the Mississippi is bringing down to the Gulf. So here's the platform. In New Madrid. And look at that enormous river. Here you're looking at the remnants of a giant lake. This beautiful lake is called Reelfoot Lake, with its cypress trees and lily pads. It's all that remains of a giant lake formed by this earthquake. As evidenced by this history book, it's got a very curious title. When the Mississippi ran backwards, they document this terrible earthquake. This is another reason why it's such a devastating place to have an earthquake. They're comparing its 6.0 magnitude 1895 earthquake and the destruction. Look, it's up both of those rivers, the Mississippi and the Ohio. Comparing that to this 6.7 magnitude earthquake in Los Angeles, its destruction zone is small. So that's why if you had an 8 or bigger earthquake in the center of America, it would be horrendous because of the soil. They call it alluvial plain, much more deadly. And here's another curious thing about this. Look at all those circles in those fields, the ones that haven't been covered up by city. Those circles are what are the evidence of what they call sand blows. Because of this sandy soil and the compaction, they were explosions, or they call them sand blows. Now, here is an eyewitness report from the New Madrid Earthquake Museum. It says, we were visited by a violent shock of an earthquake, accompanied by an awful noise resembling loud but distant thunder, followed by the complete saturation of the air with sulfurous vapor, causing total darkness. The screams of the affrighted inhabitants running to and fro, not knowing where to go or what to do, the cracking of the trees falling, the roaring of the Mississippi, probably flowing backwards, that formed a scene truly horrible. And so a lot of this comes right out of the Book of Mormon. Remember 3 days of darkness? They couldn't light. It was a tough time. So points of destruction, pointing, I think, back to Book of Mormon times. Now, we're going to enter into another area, spiritual warfare. There was a point also during the time of Christ's birth and Christ's death where the people were attacked by a group of people called the Gadianton robbers. And this is in 3 Nephi 4:7. So here is where we read for the first time in the Book of Mormon about warriors being dressed in a lambskin, with a lambskin about their loins. There are several accounts of the Lamanites coming to war with skins about their loins, but this is the only mention of lambskin. A lamb is a young sheep. These robbers were different in other respects as well. They had armor and head plates similar to the Nephites and what the Nephites wore in battle. Why? because most of them were apostate Nephites. The Gadianton robbers came mainly out of the Nephites. Shaved heads, dried blood, and lambskin seems to involve a direct mocking of the Lord and Savior, who was at that time a young lad growing up across the ocean in Israel. Another connection, I think. And what did they do about this spiritual warfare? What was salvation to these people? It involved obedience and gathering. Obedience. Now, in order to understand this, we have to look at some principles, some scientific principles again. Triangulation. We all use it on our cell phones. It's the way with the maps on our cell phone and the satellite images, we're able to locate where we want to be or where we want to go. It's called triangulation. Here's a little exercise to help with that. So how many points can you draw through that line? The answer is an infinite. Question number 2, how many lines can pass through both of these 2 points at the same time? Obviously, the answer is only one. We're talking about this principle of triangulation. The prophets, starting with Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, have all told us where the final battles took place. They took place at the Hill Cumorah. And the Hill Cumorah is where? Not in Central America. It's in New York, the state of New York. That doesn't mean we know where anything else is, but they've all been clear and distinct on this one fact, that the that the final battles took place in New York. So you can see other possibilities here. Hemispheric, North America, even very limited. So, but what if the Lord does give us a second pin in the map, so to speak? Then we can start using this principle called triangulation. With only one pin in the map, we can't do it, because it could be the rest of the Book of Mormon lands could be anywhere in the world. So let's go ahead and examine this concept and see if it helps us with these 2 eclipses. So here you've got Cumorah, which I call it a fact. Joseph and Oliver called it a fact also, or gospel doctrine. In spite of what the modern scholars say, the Book of Mormon final battles took place in New York. So, if we're going to examine a second pin, why not Zarahemla? And you'll notice the Zarahemla we're talking about is on the Mississippi River. Down here is where the intersection of those 2 eclipses are. So, this is a theory or a speculation, personal revelation, if you will. So we have 2 pins in the map. Now we can start speculating. First of all, looking at a pattern. In the Doctrine and Covenants, which is very, very tiny little section, there's only 4 verses in this section. But verse 3 says, "Let them build up a city unto my name upon the land opposite the city of Nauvoo, and let the name of Zarahemla be named upon it." So is there a pattern that the Lord uses to help us understand that he is actually talking about he's giving Joseph a commandment to go across the river from Nauvoo and to build a city. And then he says, oh, by the way, you're to call it Zarahemla. It's a commandment. Here's a scriptural pattern. Consider a future city, which the Lord both named and located. Can you think of what it was? It was New Jerusalem. And also a valley that the Lord named and located, Adam-on-Diamond. And 2 promised lands, Canaan and Canaan. Pronounced the same, spelt differently, totally different locations. So, assuming that we have 2 pins in the map, we can now begin to speculate on other locations. And what does all this have to do with the intersection point? Well, this is cool, I think. This right here is the intersection point. And we're going to talk about a story from the Book of Mormon and see if it fits to a land which is central to both Nephites and Lamanites. So playing along here, if the Lamanites are south of this wilderness, this narrow strip of wilderness, and the Nephites are north of this narrow strip of wilderness, then this right here would be the center of our lands, Nephite and Lamanite lands. So in the Book of Mormon, when Laconius is gathering his people to contend with the Gadianton robbers, what does he say? He's drawing them to the center of our lands. And we know it's our lands, meaning both Nephite and Lamanite, because Lamanites are invited to come there too. And he says you have to come together for how long? 7 years it's going to take. 7, remember, is a significant sacred number. So why 7? Why not 6? Why not 8? Why 7? Well, let's look at this a little more, studying it out and seeing what it has to do with the 2 eclipses. I think the Lord is using Southern Illinois to teach us. Continuing our discussion about this being a land that they were going to have to come to protect themselves. And is it a defensive location? Yes. Here's the Ohio River as it comes down through Southern Illinois. It cuts through the Ozark Mountains. Rugged area. You're not going to get across that river and make a sneak attack on that area of Southern Illinois. Look on the other river, the Mississippi. Rugged high bluffs, Southern Illinois. You're not going to make a sneak attack there either. So where are you going to have to attack these people? From the front. And the state of Illinois has discovered 41 ancient defensive forts along this area right here. Here are remnants from some of those forts. And here's a short video.
Governor Laconius, this is one of my favorites. Governor Laconius, if you remember your Book of Mormon stories, the Gadiantons now are so tough. They're taking on the Lamanites and the Nephites during the daytime in open warfare. And so Governor Laconius decides to gather everybody into one space and to fortify it. So what he does, he goes to the middle of the Promised Land area, wherever that is. What we have in archaeology, we have a place right here, pretty well centered at the very tip of Illinois. And what this is an enigma to our archaeologists, because right down here, the green is the higher elevation, 500 to 1,000. The tan is lower elevation. And all the fortifications they build a line here all the way across. This is about 90 miles. This is the Ohio up to this point. This is the Mississippi down to here. And all the forts are right there on that line. And right there. 41 forts, all in a line. And the reason it's such an enigma, because they're only there for 7 years, they didn't leave a lot of stuff around. Oh, you gotta.
Okay. So obedience and gathering saved the Nephites and the Lamanites from destruction. And it happened right there. Now, is that a coincidence? Or could it have happened someplace else? Well, let's keep looking at that area. And let's see if we can see a Middle East connection to this area. Okay. This is curious, but the question is, why does Michigan have such a funny shape? I remember as a boy thinking, this is crazy. It's all broken up. You've got the northern Michigan and this little island. Why? Well, it's because of copper. And it was the richness of Michigan came from its copper in the North Country up here. This right here is a national park, an island on the border of Canada that's a national park. Michigan gained statehood in 1837, 9 years prior to Wisconsin. See, this looks like it should belong to Wisconsin, but they didn't get it. Michigan copper is unique in the world. What you're looking at is pure copper embedded in some kind of an amalgam. It looks like concrete to me, but that's pure copper. This is pure copper here too. This was brought up from the bottom of Lake Superior. If that were gold, you'd probably be one of the richest people in the whole world. But it's copper, pure copper. I just love this slide, so that's why it's there. It shows you this guy right here. It looks like an aircraft carrier. It's the same size as an aircraft carrier. It's the big freighters that operate on the Great Lakes. Shows you how big those lakes are, kind of. But back to our question. Ancient mining occurred in the northern Michigan area of copper. And it had worldwide significance, which we will explore. Great Lakes fingerprint. This is a shipwreck in the Mediterranean Ocean. And in that shipwreck, there's 1.2 tons of copper, not necessarily this shipwreck, but a similar shipwreck to this, 1.2 tons of copper. And guess where that copper had come from? It came from the Great Lakes, found in the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea in a shipwreck. Is that a coincidence? Or how'd they get there? Well, this right here, it's evidence of a giant ancient copper trade. We'll get to that in a minute. Lots and lots of weapons made out of copper found in and around the Great Lakes. The Kinderhook plates found near just south of Nauvoo. And a lot of people say it's a hoax. I don't think it's a hoax. Either that, or if it is a hoax, somebody went to a great deal of effort. These are replicas of what the Kinderhook plates looked like. It's evidence that something was happening there. This is cool. In the area of Michigan, there were thousands of these black slate tablets uncovered by farmers all over Michigan. And they were given away or sold in private collections everywhere, but a large collection of over 1,000 of these tablets was given to Notre Dame University. After many years, the university felt that they needed to unload the alleged fakes. People said, oh, they're just fakes. But to simply throw them away would be bad public relations, because there is a possibility they could be antiquity. And so what did they do? They gave them, the collection was offered to Milton R. Hunter, a 70 general authority of the LDS Church, because he was an anthropologist, and yeah, they could unload it easily to him. Well, he kept the collection. This was given to him in the 60s. And in 75, after he died, the Hunter family deeded the collection to the LDS Church. Well, the LDS Church continued the game of hot potato by gifting the collection in 2003 to the State of Michigan History Museum. and there they reside out of public view. No one was willing to definitively declare that they're fake, but they also weren't willing to say that they're real. Utah has geographic regions, Canyonlands, the Colorado Plateau, and so does Illinois. They have regions. I found it very curious that Southern Illinois has a nickname, Little Egypt. First of all, they said it's of uncertain origin, dating back to from the late 1700s. They also say that the many mounds found down there in the area may have reminded people of the pyramids of Egypt. So here you see lots of mounds. What were the mounds for in the Hopewell people? These are cemeteries. That's where they buried their dead, in mounds like these. And so there were a lot of mounds in Southern Illinois. Why? Could it be because that's where there was a great battle, or a bunch of great battles, where the Gadianton robbers came against the Nephites and Lamanites? Who knows? The wide floodplain, another reason for its nickname, could stem from the early explorers and trappers finding ancient Middle East type artifacts in the area, like this one right here. And then here's another piece of curiosity. Why all of these towns with Egyptian names? I don't know. And there's a cave. We can't talk about that. That's a whole nother subject. Okay, we're going to end it right here with Phoenicia and its linkage to this area. And most people, this just kind of went under the radar for most people, even though they tried to promote it. This is a ship that was built on the template of a ship that was found in the mud near Marseille, France, an ancient Phoenician vessel, 600 BC. They pulled it up and they used it as a template to build this. It's the only traditionally built replica of a Phoenician ship in the world. Who were the Phoenicians? Well, they were the great seafarers of the old world. This is Philip Bill that had this built. We're going to talk about the two voyages of the Phoenicia. The first voyage, I feel, replicates Lehi's voyage. The second voyage of this ship replicates Mulek's voyage. So LDS scholars traditionally accept an eastern route for the Lehi group. As they traveled to the Promised Land, they most always talk about them going east. But we're going to propose that they went west based upon this and other information. So the first voyage of the Phoenicia ended in 2010. They traveled down the east coast of Africa. As they came south, they replenished their ship, I think, at the same place that the Lehites replenished their ship, in an area called the Comora Islands. The largest island is called Grand Comora. The capital of the Comora Islands is Moroni. These two names predate the Book of Mormon. Most people didn't draw any connection, thought it was a coincidence, although some of the anti-Mormons felt like it was evidence that Joseph stole the names from these areas and put them in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so the Lehi expedition may have stopped here to replenish, just like the Phoenician expedition did. Now we go into the second expedition. This time, I have to go back, darn it. I have to go back. And a very important key right here. The Phoenician expedition had no intent to go to America. Philip Beale, the British explorer that put this whole thing together, he wanted to prove that the Phoenicians could have circumnavigated Africa. But as they came around the Cape of Cape Town, literally their boat would not go where they wanted it to go. It was on its way to America. They fought and fought for 74 days. And finally, at this point right here, they were able to get the ship to go back toward the Mediterranean Ocean. That's key, because you come around here, you realize this is by far quicker than going east. Only 74 days to get to that point. Okay, so let's continue on. Now we'll go to the second voyage. So 10 years after the first voyage, Captain Beale decided this time he was going to go to America, and he was going to prove that 2,000 years before Columbus, the Phoenicians came to America. And it's kind of a no-brainer. This, by the way, is their promo video promoting the second voyage. The reason we don't know any more than we do about the Phoenicians is because they lost the Battle of Carthage against the Romans. And to the victors goes history. But they rivaled Rome in power. So both Christopher Columbus and the Phoenician ship launched from the Canary Islands. It took Christopher Columbus 70 days to make that journey to Santo Domingo. It took the Phoenician 37 days, almost half the time. The Phoenician ship was faster, but it was also not as maneuverable. It had to go with the wind. And you can see it was going one way, and that was to America. Okay. So I mentioned the first journey replicated the Lehigh. journey to America. The second journey, I think, replicated the Mulekite journey to America. We don't know much about Mulek. And so this is obviously very speculative, but it really seems to fit in my mind. This is a verse out of Jeremiah. And the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. He slew also all the princes of Judah in Riblah. Then he put out the eyes of Zedekiah, the king of Babylon bound him in chains and carried him to Babylon and put him in prison till the day of his death. So here you see in this painting the sons of Zedekiah being slain before his eyes. So if this Bible verse is true, then what the Book of Mormon teaches, that Mulek was the son of King Zedekiah, is false, right? Or is it? Could Mulek have made it to the Americas without Bible prophets being made aware? I think it's very possible. In this next slide, so this is one of the settlements of the Phoenicians. And they settled, and this is obviously Israel right here. Their main settlement and the capital of the Phoenician Empire was in Carthage, Tunisia. But here there was a strong settlement of the Phoenicians. And one of their principal cities was Sidon. We know now that Sidon, see, we're starting to put things together. We know that the word Sidon only appears in the Book of Mormon after the Mulekites are found by the people of Mosiah. You see, it's a Phoenician word. This could be a clue connecting the people of Zarahemla to ancient Phoenicia. If a part of the royal family escaped Israel, they may have been transported to safety by Phoenicians. The king and or the queen may have paid these ancient seafarers to get her as far away from the impending destruction of Jerusalem as possible. So here's a Book of Mormon perspective to this Jeremiah verse. Before carrying King Zedekiah off to Babylon, the conquerors had each of his sons slain in front of him. They next had his eyes put out, ensuring that the last thing this Jewish king saw was the end of his seed. Somehow one son escaped. His mother may have been pregnant with him at the time of the slaughter, thus saving his life. And since she's royalty, and these are the freight carriers of the old ancient world, it's very logical that they could have paid the Phoenicians to get her out of town, to get her as far away as possible. And they knew exactly where to take her because they had been there many times. That's my conclusion. And by the way, Mulek is also a Phoenician word, meaning little prince or little king. It all seems to fit. Here's another clue. So here's Nauvoo, and here is Zarahemla. This chart right here comes right out of the Joseph Smith papers. You see Nauvoo right here and Zarahemla across the river. The church owned more land during Joseph's life in Zarahemla than they did in Nauvoo. And when Mosiah found the Mulekites, they weren't living in so much a city called Zarahemla. They were living in a land that they called Zarahemla. So as Laconius was having his people gather, in the Book of Mormon, it says they were gathered to the southern part of the land of Zarahemla, which would be southern Illinois. And another verse. This is all in Omni. It says, and they journeyed in the wilderness and were brought by the hand of the Lord across the great waters into the land where Mosiah discovered them. And they had dwelt there from that time forth. So the Mulekites came, they settled, and they stayed put. until Mosiah found them. And we know that Lehi could possibly have landed in northern Florida. The Mulekites could have landed in Zarahemla and stayed put. And the final verse in Helaman, now the land south was called Lehi, and the land north was called Mulek, which was after the son of Zedekiah. For the Lord did bring Mulek into the land north, and Lehi into the land south. Okay. So this brings us to the end of this story, or the journey of this ship, and how it found its way to Montrose, Iowa. Montrose is right across the river from Nauvoo. It's part of Zarahemla. When it came time, after Captain Beale finished his second expedition, he was done. And it was time to find a buyer for the ancient boat. He tried to sell it to some of the great museums in the world, but no one seemed to care. He was knocking, they weren't answering. Lo and behold, there's this couple. Well, before we get there,
the ship was prepared for another epic voyage. They left Tunisia, in the north of Africa, in September of 2019, crossing the vast Atlantic Ocean, and arriving in Florida in February 2020. They had proved that ancient people had the technology to arrive in the Americas.
They arrived in February 4th, 2020. Remember that 2020 is an important year. I think the Lord is using that year to make a connection with the Book of Mormon and with Phoenicia.
Almost 3,000 years before the European explorers. The Phoenicia expeditions were supported by governments and prestigious institutions of different countries, such as the Scientific Exploration Society, the Clean Seas Campaign, and scientists and historians from many museums and universities.
A replica ship sails into South Florida after several months at sea.
Yeah, 5 months and 6,000 miles later. The 66-foot wooden vessel was used to conduct research on plastic pollution levels in the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, the Phoenician ship made its way to South Florida.
Well, the ship has been sailing across the Atlantic Ocean for months now. NBC6 reporter Derek Lewis was there for the triumphant return.
This is the Phoenician replica ship that arrived here just a few minutes ago. It has traveled 6,000 miles across the Atlantic to get here in Miami.
Now, this historic Phoenician ship, the only replica of the oldest vessel capable of crossing an ocean, will have a permanent home by the Mississippi River, at the Phoenician Ship Museum, in Montrose, Iowa. The museum will exhibit many historical and archaeological artifacts, with the Phoenician ship as its centerpiece. Modern interactive displays will entertain and educate about ancient American mysteries, and will build a vast community around the museum, with many activities.
Okay, so no takers for the ship. What was he going to do with it? He had to get it out of that port of Fort Lauderdale. And it was starting to not just be an eyesore, but it was suffering from, there was a big hurricane and or a storm, and it was damaged. So something had to happen. So here came its saviors, Mike and Betty LaFontaine. Mike is half Cherokee, his wife, Betty, full-blood Navajo. Here they are with the captain of the ship, Philip Beale. They're taking it off of his hands, and they said, we will take care of it. So they disassembled it, trucked it up to Montrose, Iowa.
Mike LaFontaine here at the Phoenician Workshop today, the 16th of September. This is a new sign we just got put up. Heartland Research Group, the Phoenicia building. Let's go in here and see what we have going on. We have Elder Dunn and Elder Bell working here. They're working on the hall. Good job, guys.
So what you're seeing here is a workshop where they're actually reassembling the ship, and they're going to build a museum right there in Montrose, Iowa. People come and volunteer their time. These are two LDS missionaries, but there are other people that come. People just very, very interested in what's being put up.
We got Mike. We just finished up putting up one of these pieces. He's putting in pocket screws.
Yeah. The big one for the keel.
Yeah, we'll have to pick up some more of those tomorrow. We got Brian over here working on prepping our next piece. That's gonna be going in. We got Roger here. He's playing with the fan. And another thing, maybe try to hold that thing totally flat. See how it does flat. But yeah, keep trying it anyway. Coming in here to the gift shop. Hello. We got a pretty good group here in the gift shop here.
So that is the end of the presentation. The connections are, I think, incredible. Many of the connections point backwards to a period of time where I think Nephites and Lamanites struggled in the south of Illinois against a formidable enemy, and they conquered them. This is an area where there was, I think, a giant copper trade, and Phoenicians brought a young infant and its mother to a land far away from the king of Babylon. All of these are connections that just seem to be popping up. So let me close with this verse from Joseph Smith again. From all the times of their revolutions, all the appointed days, months, and years, and all of the days of their days, months, and years, and all of their glories, laws, and set times shall be revealed in the days of the dispensation of the fullness of times. I think these things are being revealed and opened up to us if we'll just look at them. And they're not coincidences. It's part of what we call divine design. Heavenly Father is in the workings of this.